Yesterday someone sent me the Rigpa Sangha newsletter thinking I might like to know what was going on. I thought, what is so disturbing about this letter that to me, a few years ago I would have thought was perfectly okay and quite inspiring and full of all this stuff that they're doing, and I realised that what it was is they're just going on as normal. Of course, Sogyal's not there, so you don't have a boss who's abusing everyone, so obviously that's different. And people could feel quite safe because there's a code of conduct in there now, there's a grievance procedure, and to any casual outside observer it all looks very benign, and even to people who've been Rigpa for years, it's like, oh, it must be very comforting. We're all going back on track now. We're all just continuing on, and that's fine in one way. It's just that for me, there's this underlying issue that has not been addressed. And it's pretty clear to me now that it won't be addressed. And you see the same thing in Shambala. They have these kind of pseudo-apologies come out. And again, they miss the point. They don't quite get to the actual guts of the matter. And unfortunately, the guts of the matter is that these forms of Tibetan Buddhism permit abuse. And I didn't want to believe that. I really wanted to believe that this was wrong in any form of Buddhism, this kind of guru abuse. I thought it must be wrong. It's Buddhism, it's no harming. Non-harming is the basis of Buddhism. How can this possibly be considered to be acceptable? But I have come to the realization that, at least for certain lineages, Rigpa lineages, for instance, Shambala, it's perfectly okay. Not only is it perfectly okay, it's like enshrined in their lineage. It's this crazy wisdom idea, and it's a fake crazy wisdom. Crazy wisdom these days, it's not true crazy wisdom for a start. It's completely misused, that term. And all it is an excuse for abuse. Let's be realistic about this. These guys are abusive. And, people will, Chogyam Trungpa, yeah, he said some great things, but the guy was an alcoholic. And there's this idea that somehow that's okay. And, sure, I think someone can have a very powerful effect on someone in a particular area. But if they're not actually living an enlightened life, then they haven't got it. And to see them as completely enlightened when they do the kinds of things that Sogyal did and Chogyam Trungpa did and the Shambala guy now and, all the Shambhala men running the place who are all just as bad apparently, it's all crap. It's just... And yet these organisations just keep going. On the surface, it looks fine, looks beneficial. But every cult looks pretty good on the surface because people wouldn't join otherwise. The problem is that they actually still think that abuse is okay. The only way place is not okay is on a general level. And so they're going to get rid of it on the general level, on the worldly level. But when it comes to Vajrayana, it's just going to get more secret. And you can see by the code of conduct, the special section for Vajrayana, you will have signed up. And once you've signed up, you have given your consent to that level of spiritual teaching. And we all know what that means, doesn't it? It means that the guru can do what the hell ever he wants to you. And the thing is, it's not spoken, it's not out there in the front, at the beginning, before somebody gets involved in the religion. And that's a cult induction tactic. It's all lovely on the outside. They don't tell you where you're going to go. They don't tell you where their path is going to lead and what's at the end. And what's at the end is servitude. It's servitude to whoever is your Lama. And if there's one thing that Dzongsa Khyentse has done in this whole discussion, he's been quite clear that once you've taken a Lama and you're in full knowledge of what that means, and you've taken empowerment with that Lama, that means that you don't criticize, you obey, and that's it. You're stuck, and you can't even think that you're being abused. And that's in The Guru Drinks Bourbon. He says that the system, yes, it is open to abuse, but if you want enlightenment, you can't worry about abuse. And so you can't label it as abuse. And in his very first statement on Sogyal's abuse, he said that in terms of Vajrayana, and he stated this again and again, if you're properly prepared, then on a Vajrayana level, there's no problem with what Sogyal did. And that's the problem. That's the issue that is not upfront. You don't get that information until you get to the point where you want to enter the Vajrayana. By that point, you're so caught up in this community and in this whole system of thinking that you just take the next step because you want the next level of teachings. It's held up as some special thing, you know, it's like, and it is special. The Vajrayana is special, it's a special thing. But it's this feudal servitude that goes with it that is a real problem. And that's what we must not take into the West. It has no place in the West. And what the hell is spiritual about servitude? So the thing is the very core of the religion, that's it, that's what's there. Now, it's not in all lineages. His Holiness makes it quite clear that according to Tsongkhapa, this is all not okay. But the behaviour of Tibetan Lamas in general is pretty disgusting. You know, I've been in Facebook groups where people from all over, from all sorts of teachers, share how they've been abused. And it's just this really widespread. So it's an issue for the whole religion. You have your individual lamas who are not falling into that, but at the same time, unless they really state it clearly out front, they probably accept that. And because there's this whole tradition of, Milarepa and Mapa, and like, that there's that concept that that's okay. I think it's just today we have to do what His Holiness says and accept that crazy wisdom is no longer, it's just not appropriate because it's been so badly misused. Let's be quite clear about the value of this person who embodies wisdom and compassion. When he says that rotten institutions need to be toppled, I think we should pay attention, really. And I'm not going out and saying, we've got to topple Shambala and Rigpa. It's just we need to make sure that people know what's at the core of these cults. There's special circumstances. It doesn't matter about those special circumstances. The special circumstances are that you know what you're going in for. I mean, if people had known that Sogyal was going to hit them, they would still have gone into that relationship. Some of them, pretty sure, because they wanted the teachings, they wanted enlightenment, they were promised a fast track to enlightenment. It's a lure. So people will still do it and they'll still be damaged. And what is so distressing, I think, is that there's been no coming out and saying, no, that behaviour was actually wrong. Even for people who knew what they were getting into. And, we did. We'd studied the words of my perfect teacher. So we knew what kind of relationship we were supposed to have with our teacher. I mean, we followed that, all that servitude that's laid out in that book. But the bit that we didn't get right there was that we actually didn't have a teacher that was worth following in that way. You know, Zongsa Khyentse goes around, he says, oh, well, the problem is that Sogyal didn't prepare them properly. And for some people that's true. You know, new students were inducted into his bedroom. I'm not talking about them. No, I'm talking about the people who really did, they did know. They didn't know they were going to be hit. They didn't know they were going to be punched. They didn't know they were going to be traumatized. No, they thought it was going to help them get to enlightenment. The point is that you can understand all that, you can know that that's the deal. Even in those circumstances, they were harmed. And Rigpa is not saying it was wrong. Zongsa Khyentse is not saying that in terms of the Vajrayana, that behaviour was wrong. And that's the problem. For some teachers, that's how they think. And really, you want to avoid those teachers because you'll get trapped. That's what happens. They got trapped in these relationships with these abusive lamas. And they're given no way out because the whole relationship it's like, oh, you're my student now. And the deal is that you don't complain and you don't say anything. And whatever I do, you see that as a teaching, no matter what I do. And there's this misunderstanding that if I hit you, that's somehow okay. And they call it pure perception, but that's not a true understanding of pure perception. You know, pure doesn't mean anything I do is right. Pure doesn't mean if I hit you, it doesn't hurt. That's not, pure perception is simply seeing emptiness. You can see the emptiness of the Syrian conflict. That doesn't mean that it's not hurting a lot of people. And the fact that, these lamas are supposed to be enlightened is supposed to make that different. But you can't say to a normal person, well, bash, emptiness doesn't hurt emptiness, bash. Because to them it does. And honestly, you would have to be a very enlightened person to not actually be hurt when someone punches you. And, some people say, oh, I was hit and it really transformed me, But you're trying really, really hard to make that happen, because that's the deal. That's why you've subjected yourself to that kind of behaviour. But are you being honest with yourself? If someone rapes you, does that shift something in you? Because you think your rapist is somehow enlightened? It leaves you with trauma. That's the truth of it, And this idea that somehow traumatizing people more helps them to drop, to heal from previous trauma, it's nonsense. It's just nonsense. All it does is lay trauma on top of trauma. And we can totally delude ourselves. We can think that we've had a spiritual realization of some kind, and all we've done is gone into a dissociative state as protection against something that is actually traumatic. And so you have people, running the organisation that Zongsa Khyentse is going to make sure that they understand what the real meaning of Vajrayana is, which is, in terms of how he thinks, that means abuse is actually okay. In terms of Vajrayana, what Sogyal Rinpoche did is not a problem. Yeah, I'm quoting Zongsa Khyentse there. And Ocean Topical, if a great master kills somebody, it's no problem, That's how they think. So, the code of conduct now in Rigpa is that before you enter this relationship, you're going to sit down with a senior instructor and you're going to have it all explained to you. And what are you going to have explained to you? Are they actually going to say to you, it means he can abuse you? He can do what he wants with you. And you have to accept that. That's what you're going into. And they won't actually say, what Sogyal did wasn't really wrong in terms of Vajrayana. They're going to lay it out like that. They need your money. What I'm saying is basically these organisations, they're wolf in sheep's clothing. They're not what they appear to be, because when you get down the path some way, you get to the point where you want to go into the Vajrayana, the whole system changes in terms of what's expected in terms of behaviour. And what's expected of you is that you will be a servant in a feudal court. And that's quite clear in Shambala. I mean, they even talk about their king, you know, and their court. And for God's sake, what place does feudalism have in the West in 2019? It has no place at all. And Zolzak Kintsi is like, what did he say recently in a Facebook post? Something about American values or Western values destroying Buddhism. No, destroying Dharma, he said. You know, Dharma's truth. Dharma's owned by the Tibetans. It isn't owned by anyone. You know, Dharma is Dharma, you know, and there's Buddha Dharma and there's Tibetan Buddhist Dharma. But Western values don't destroy Dharma, they destroy feudalism. And feudalism needs to be destroyed. It needs to be removed from Tibetan Buddhism. It's not helpful in a modern world for modern people. Now, if you think that the feudal structure is a vital part of Tibetan Buddhism, then you might think it destroys Tibetan Buddhism. But if Tibetan Buddhism doesn't adapt, it's just going to be this irrelevant little religion of these crazy people who recreate a feudal court in the modern world and expect that somehow to help them to live in the real world. Or maybe they're not concerned about living in the real world at all. Western values are things like freedom of speech, equality before the law, freedom of choice, freedom of religion, human rights. Okay, so how do those things destroy Dharma? They don't. They support Dharma because they support people's right to self-determination. And surely that's better for somebody's spiritual development than servitude. So this idea that the West is destroying Buddhism is really a dangerous idea. It's easy for somebody who wants to keep their court, who wants to remain king of their little kingdom, to mock any suggestion that comes from Western values. Oh, it's easy to mock. And then the people that think these gurus have got all the answers turn against values that are probably more in line with what the Buddha taught, you know, than feudalism. So is Shambala going to remove the court? How did it turn out? Oh, abuse through and through. I think we can say it failed, I really do. What I wanted to say here was just that there's these glossy surfaces on the outside, there's these pseudo apologies, and there's this real lack of actually saying that what these teachers did was wrong, was harmful on a Vajrayana level. There's this making of a separate system of ethics for Vajrayana, in which the Vajrayana Lama can do what the hell he wants to do with you. And this is dangerous. Not only is it dangerous, how the hell is it Buddhism? So where does that leave us? I just think we need to make it really clear that that's the deal. If you enter these organisations, that's where you're heading. That's what's at the core of it. And it's just not healthy. You know, even if you want the Tibetan Buddhist teachings, and it's fine, you know, there's a lot that they have to offer. There's absolutely no doubt about that. We would never have gone into it had there not been some benefit. We just need to choose who we go to really carefully, and we need to ask some really, really pertinent questions before we even do their basic meditation course. Because you might think, oh, you know, that's harmless. I'm just going to go and learn how to meditate. But once you're in that culture, the culture of that group, you're being sucked in right from the beginning They need your money. They're going to make sure it seems all very nice. But if you keep going with them, if you follow that path with those organisations, that's where you're going to end up. You're going to end up in servitude with someone who, if they want to, they can abuse you. And you, if you want to be enlightened, can't complain about it. I mean, it's stupid, but that's the belief system. And the belief system is, it's like programmed into you bit by bit. Subtly, you don't recognise it at first, you know, but it is a whole belief system, and that's where it goes. So I just think people need to be aware of that. So we need to know that there is a wolf behind the sheep's clothing.